There's a particular kind of arrogance that comes from never being challenged. The kind that walks into a room and decides who belongs there before anyone has spoken a single word. The kind that looks at a person and sees only the surface, never the depth underneath. Minsu Kwon had built one of the most powerful investment firms in New York from the ground up. Sharp, calculated, ruthless when he needed to be. He had sat across from hundreds of candidates in that corner office, and he had learned, or so he believed, to read people in the first 30 seconds. He was about to discover exactly how wrong he could be. Park and Kwon Capital occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Everything about it said power. The marble reception desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the quiet hum of serious money being moved by serious people. It was the kind of place that made most people feel small the moment they stepped off the elevator. Sarah Collins did not feel small. She stepped off that elevator on a Tuesday morning in a tailored charcoal suit, her natural hair pulled back cleanly, a leather portfolio under her arm, and the particular calm of a woman who had spent years in rooms that tried to make her feel like she didn't belong and had stopped letting them. She had been here before. Not this office specifically, but this feeling. The receptionist's slightly surprised look, the waiting room where she was the only black face, the subtle recalibration in people's expressions when they realized she was there for the senior analyst position and not to deliver something. She had learned to let it wash over her like water. She checked in at the front desk, took a seat, and waited. Minsu Kwon reviewed Sarah's file for exactly 4 minutes before his assistant showed her in. 4 minutes was longer than he usually gave, but something about the resume had caught his attention. Not favorably. Harvard, yes. Goldman Sachs, yes. The numbers were there. But he had built his firm on a specific culture, and in his experience, his very limited, very unchallenged experience, certain candidates fit that culture and certain candidates didn't. He had already made his decision before she sat down. Sarah walked into that corner office, shook his hand firmly, and took her seat across from him, with the composure of someone who would close deals that would make his eyes water. The interview lasted 11 minutes. Minsu asked 3 questions, each one slightly more dismissive than the last. His body language said everything his words carefully avoided. He leaned back in his chair, he glanced at his phone twice. He used the particular tone of a man performing an obligation rather than conducting a genuine evaluation. Then he turned slightly toward his deputy, a Korean man standing near the window, and said in Korean, quietly and with complete confidence that she wouldn't understand, "She's impressive on paper, but she won't fit here. Too much attitude. Wrap this up." The deputy nodded. Minsu turned back to Sarah with a practiced smile. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Collins. We'll be in touch." Sarah didn't move. She set her portfolio on his desk carefully, opened it, and then she looked at him directly and said in flawless, accent-perfect Korean, "Before you wrap this up, I think you should look at page 3. The room went completely still. Minsu's expression didn't collapse dramatically. It did something worse. It froze. That particular freeze of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not where he thought it was. His deputy by the window looked away. Sarah waited. Page 3 of Sarah Collins' portfolio contained things Minsu Kwon had not bothered to read in his 4-minute review. It contained the details of a derivatives restructuring strategy she had personally developed at Goldman Sachs that had protected over $2 billion in client assets during a market correction in 2019. It contained a letter of recommendation from the CFO of one of the 3 largest sovereign wealth funds in Asia, written in Korean. It contained evidence that she had spent 2 years working in Seoul, that she was fluent in Korean and Mandarin, and that she had quietly turned down senior positions at 2 firms that Minsu considered direct competitors. She had not put this on the front page of her resume. She had put it on page 3 because she had learned in 11 years on Wall Street exactly how long it took for certain people to decide they already knew what she was, and she had learned to wait. Minsu read page 3 in silence. The practiced smile was gone. What replaced it was something more complicated, the particular expression of a man recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the last 11 minutes. He set the portfolio down carefully. "Miss Collins," he said, and this time his voice had lost its performance entirely. "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked at him with that same calm she had walked in with. "You owe me a conversation," she said, "a real one this time." She reached over and turned to page 4. They talked for 2 hours. Not an interview, a conversation between two people who understood the same language. Not just Korean, but the language of markets, risk, strategy, and the kind of vision that builds something that lasts. Minsu had built Park and Kwon Capital in 15 years, from a 2-person operation to a 40-person firm managing $3 billion in assets. He was brilliant, and he knew it. What he was discovering slowly, uncomfortably, and with the particular humility of someone being shown their own blind spot, was that brilliance had made him lazy in certain ways. Sarah had spent 11 years being underestimated. It had made her precise, prepared, patient in a way that Minsu, who had never had to wait for a room to take him seriously, had never needed to be. By the time the conversation ended, the light outside his floor-to-ceiling windows had shifted from morning to afternoon. His deputy had quietly left the room an hour earlier. Minsu leaned back in his chair, differently this time. Not the performative lean of a man deciding someone's fate, the genuine lean of a man thinking. "The position I posted," he said finally, "it's not actually the right role for what you bring." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I want to talk about a partnership track," he said, "if you're willing to have that conversation." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, New York spread out 42 floors below them, indifferent, relentless, full of rooms that had tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. "I'm willing," she said. And for the first time since she had stepped off that elevator that morning, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because she had won, because she had known all along. The offer letter arrived on a Thursday. Sarah read it twice at her kitchen table, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her. The terms were serious. The title was serious. The number at the bottom was very serious. She sat with it for a long time. She had learned not to make decisions quickly when it came to rooms that had already shown her who they were before she sat down. Minsu Kwon had shown her something in that office. First, who he defaulted to being, and then who he was capable of becoming when he was honest with himself. She wasn't sure yet which version would show up on a Tuesday morning when the pressure was real and the stakes were high. She signed the letter anyway, because she had also learned that some things were worth finding out. The first month was exactly what she expected. Intense, fast, occasionally bruising. Park and Kwon Capital moved at a pace that left no room for sentiment. Minsu was demanding in the way that people who have built something from nothing are always demanding. Not cruel, but relentless, with standards that didn't flex for anyone. He didn't flex them for Sarah either. She respected that. What she didn't expect was the Thursday evening 3 weeks in, when everyone else had gone home and she was still at her desk running numbers on a merging markets position, and he appeared in her doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk without asking. "You're reading the Seoul data wrong," he said. "I'm reading it differently than you," she corrected without looking up. He pulled a chair and sat down. They argued about the position for 40 minutes. Respectfully, precisely, in the way that 2 people argue when they are genuinely trying to find the truth rather than win. At the end of it, he was quiet for a moment. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said. He laughed. It surprised them both. A real laugh, unguarded, nothing professional about it. Sarah looked up from her screen. It was the first time she had seen him without the armor of the office around him. Just a man sitting across from her, in the quiet of an empty floor 42 stories above New York, drinking bad coffee and being honest. She found she didn't entirely dislike it. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment. "Bring better coffee," she said. He smiled on his way out, and Sarah turned back to her screen with the particular expression of a woman who has spent her whole career being the smartest person in the room and has just, for the first time in a long time, met someone who might actually keep up. She wasn't sure yet what to do with that, but she realized, very willing to find out. There is a particular kind of intelligence that the world spends a great deal of energy trying to overlook. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't need to. It simply prepares. It waits. It lets the room make its assumptions. And then it opens to page 3. Sarah Collins didn't walk into that office to prove anything to Minsu Kwon. She walked in to do what she had always done. Bring everything she had to the table and let it speak for itself. What happened in the weeks after was something neither of them had planned for. Because sometimes the person who challenges you most completely, who refuses to let you be lazy or small or anything less than your best, is also the person who makes the quiet Thursday evenings feel like somewhere you want to be. Minsu had spent 15 years building something impressive. He was only now beginning to understand what it meant to be genuinely seen by someone who didn't need anything from him. And Sarah, who had spent 11 years being underestimated, was discovering that being truly recognized felt different than she had imagined. Not like winning, like arriving. This is Two Can Play, where love crosses cultures, where every story begins with the truth of what happens when the world finally stops underestimating the wrong person. And where sometimes, if you're paying attention, the room that tried to overlook you becomes the place where everything changes. Subscribe for new stories every week. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today.